It's a special place because as far back as 1895, All-Ireland finals were played here.
It's hard growing up as a kid in Ireland not to be aware of Croke Park. It's part of your heritage.
History doesn't change, it remains there, and that's why that magnificent Hogan stand is there now.
Effectively what you have on the afternoon of Bloody Sunday is revenge for what had happened that morning.
The 42 rule was there, that the grounds were solely for the purpose of Gaelic games and that they were not to be used for other sports. And there was talk that if Croke Park wasn't opened up to play rugby and soccer games there, that these games would have to be played abroad.
Obviously it was very emotive for a lot of people, handing it over to rugby and soccer, whom would have been seen as competition. But I just felt that it was time to move on, and I'd rather be a president who tried something and failed, even though people probably ridiculed me, than somebody who hadn't the guts to do what he felt was the right thing to do.
It came on the radio that Croke Park was going to be opened to rugby and soccer, and to coach Ireland at Croke Park was extraordinary for me.
It gave Irish rugby fans a stadium that I believe the like of which they would never have again. Because whatever it is about Croke Park as a stadium, it works.
In the tunnel, you're so focused on doing your stuff. There's a few moments that you can really allow the emotion to get to you, and standing in the tunnel beforehand, that was one of them.
That Ireland-England game in Croke Park in 2007 was, without doubt, by some distance, the most must-win, one-off Irish match of the decade.
The build-up to that game was extraordinary. It was like no other game. Like it was definitely as if you were going to be playing for the Triple Crown, the Grand Slam and everything else.
It was such a big issue and such a big deal to have it actually happen. So to be part of that and to be running out and part of the first team that ran out was something we were very aware of.
I was conscious just saying, well, I hope the English national anthem gets the respect it deserves. That's just rugby, that's the way it should be.
I wondered how they'd be received. I didn't know, and I certainly wouldn't have, bet my life on it being, impeccably silent.
We were all listening, not to God Save the Queen, but to the voices of dissent that we half expected to hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, the anthems will now be played by the combined Army No. 1 and Guard bands.
It was always associated with the big days, big crowds, big occasions, development, looking forward and so on. And then, of course, there was the historical connection.
I suppose you have to remember how many different wars were going on in Ireland in 1920 and 1921. There was the obvious military conflict, but there are also intelligence battles being fought, and there are propaganda battles being fought. And what happens on the morning of Bloody Sunday is very much a part of the intelligence wars. The IRA, Michael Collins, are determined to try and inflict huge damage on the British intelligence effort in Ireland. And what the British intelligence effort in Ireland was about was trying, of course, to penetrate the IRA, the underground IRA, to try and destroy its effectiveness and to try and destroy its various intelligence networks.
Obviously, my grandfather was there on Bloody Sunday, and my father tried to follow him to the match, and my grandfather sent him home because there had been assassinations that morning of British or people associated with the British. So there was a feeling that something might happen that day.
Effectively what you have on the afternoon of Bloody Sunday is revenge for what had happened that morning. And when you consider the total body count as a result of both the morning shootings and the afternoon, you're talking in the region 26 to 28 people.
What the impression I would have had from my grandfather talking about it and my father was that it was a fearful day, and of course, a player was murdered.
Everybody knew that the Hogan stand was there in the 20s. I wasn't born until 1930, but we heard in school and reading there weren't that many books that time about the GA, but magazines and periodicals used to come out in the newspaper, the Hogan stand. We all knew that it was in memory of Michael Hogan, Tipperary footballer who was shot dead on what was later called Bloody Sunday.
And in terms of the GAA and its relationship with Irish republicanism, it does cement the GAA's status within republicanism to a certain extent because of what happened in the hallowed grounds of Croke Park. But also when you consider the killing of Michael Hogan, the erection of the Hogan stand in 1924, a powerful and permanent reminder of what had happened on Bloody Sunday. And even at the time of the truce and in the autumn of 1921, you begin to see senior Sinn Féin leaders appearing at All-Ireland finals, at GAA matches. They are celebrities, and they do often appear on these particular sites, in these particular grounds.
What I do know is that Lansdowne Road was in chronic need of redevelopment. It really was a fairly decaying, decrepit ground. There'd been a match where there'd been a fire underneath one of the stands, and that quarter of the end of the ground had to be closed. I think it was the Havelock end, and it just made it look. It needed a full capacity crowd to hide the cracks.
I mean, there was a sporting apartheid here, which was enforced really by the GAA. If you were a member of GAA or you played Gaelic games, you couldn't attend a soccer match or a rugby match. You'd be banned, and that ban lasted until the early 70s. Before, if you played or attended a soccer match, you were out.
The 42 rule was there, that the grounds were solely for the purpose of Gaelic games and that they were not to be used for other sports.
Most of the lads, they might have been forced to play Gaelic games in school. I mean, classically, Liam Brady went to a Christian Brothers school in Whitehall, and he was picked to play for the Irish soccer schoolboy team. And that fixture for Ireland clashed with a friendly Gaelic football match for the Christian Brothers, and he was taken into the principal's office and told if he played for Ireland in the soccer match, he'd be expelled. And this was 6 weeks before his Inter. And he decided to play the soccer match, and he was expelled. That was in 1971, not 1871. Now, in that kind of culture, there was an antipathy towards the GAA by a lot of people, a lot of Dubliners who played soccer in particular, because there was history there, and it was bad history, and that's not a long time ago.
There was a lot of discussion in the run-up to that game about the potential that existed for tension and perhaps the potential for trouble. There was an overestimation in some quarters of the potential that existed for the reopening of old wounds and for perhaps even the igniting of new hatreds. Certainly there would have been those who were not happy. But you've also got to put the peace process context on this particular game. Think of all the gestures that had been made in other directions. Think of even going back to the early 1970s when the GAA had decided finally to rescind its ban on foreign games, on people playing and attending foreign games who were members of the GAA.
Everybody was chatting about it. It was obviously going to be controversial if we ended up moving to Croke and they changed their rules to allow us in and play rugby there. So it was very much a topic of conversation amongst the media and certainly amongst the squad. In terms of options for Ireland to play, there weren't that many. So, you can actually look at the GAA itself evolving in all sorts of different ways from the 1960s onwards, of adapting. There were still difficulties around certain aspects of what was permissible and what wasn't, but it was clear by 2005, when there's more of a sense of a peace process being bedded down, that both the GAA and other institutions and organisations and individuals are ready for the kind of gestures that involve a very direct confrontation with a difficult history.
No, I could accept perfectly where people who were opposed to opening Croke Park are coming from, because members of my own family would have been against opening it, particularly some of my uncles now. They would have been traditional GAA people, totally committed, but they certainly wouldn't have been in favour of opening Croke Park. But the one thing I respected was that the vast majority of people who were opposed to opening Croke Park were actually die-hard GAA people who did all the voluntary work. And because they were so committed to the GAA, they didn't want to hear about anything else. So in that respect, I could understand perfectly where they were coming from, but I just felt that it was time to move on and that the GAA itself would actually have been the big loser if Croke Park wasn't opened.
I always felt that the GAA would do the right thing, that we wouldn't see Irish international soccer or rugby team having to leave Ireland to play matches. I don't think they would have let that happen, and they didn't, and they never were going to, I think. But I think, people were going to want an answer the day after this was mooted, and it was never going to take a day. It was going to take time to have a due process and let people discuss it.
Would it make any sense for me to allow my competitors the use of my showroom to display their goods?
If a neighbour's house went on fire, as a former Cathaoirleach of Wexford said to me the other night, and you had a spare room, you wouldn't leave them out in the cold.
As it got near that Congress, I think most people were hoping, listen, the best solution to this, from everybody's point of view, number one, a sporting point of view, is that the matches are played in Croker.
I think there was an assumption that this was going to happen, that the authorities were going to allow it. It was hard to see us going outside the country, I have to say. I didn't see a position where we were going to go and play in Wales, and I know that was touted. It was like you could play in Wales or play in England, and I just didn't see it happening. I couldn't imagine that the ban that existed was going to be enforced to such an extreme that, fellow Irishmen weren't going to be afforded the opportunity to play in their country.
I mean, as you know, the whole story about that, we stayed totally out of that, and stayed absolutely out of it. We made no calls, no letters, no discussions. Sean Kelly had to carry that.
And I knew at that stage, from a lot of the background work I had done, that it at least was going to be debated, and that we did have a good chance of passing the motion, even though I couldn't be certain and wasn't certain until I actually got the result and called out the result, because to get a 2/3 majority is very difficult, especially for such an emotive issue.
Votes returned 325. Spoiled votes 1. Valid poll 324. Tá 227. Ní 97. The motion is passed.
And I remember when it was announced, it's funny, there are events in your life where you remember where you were. I was in the car, I was driving to Dublin, and I believe it was a Saturday, and I had a meeting, and it came on the radio that Croke Park was going to be opened to rugby and soccer, and it's pretty much as I said, it was great to hear that, because we were now something completely different was going to happen. We were going to look forward.
It was close enough, and to this day people will still argue it was the wrong thing to do. And on a personal level, they're quite entitled to their vote, or to whichever way they wanted to vote. But the rule was passed, and as I say, I think everybody, even the ones who didn't want it, deep down would say, "Here, we done well. We come out of this well."
I felt the big. The achievement of what Sean Kelly was doing. I mean, the thing was, he was saying to all Irish people, not just GAA people, that Croke Park is an Irish stadium. Of course it's a Gaelic Games stadium, and of course it's there for the playing of great Gaelic games, but it's not exclusive. And if our neighbours are in trouble, we're quite happy to help out. Now, of course, there's a commercial reality as well. The GAA were going to do extremely well, but there was also a downside to that, in that you play rugby at Croke Park, and I'm sure Sean and many GAA people were very conscious of this. You play rugby at Croke Park, and you bring rugby into the homes of many people who wouldn't otherwise watch it. Lots of GAA people would watch Ireland play rugby simply because it was played at Croke Park, and they would want to see how the stadium looked and how the team responded to playing at Croke Park.
We went to Croke Park for our team run. I think they granted us an extra training session. Usually the team would go for what's known as a captain's run on Thursday before the game. But because it was Croke Park and nobody had ever played there, I think we did a training session on the Wednesday there as well.
It was, I knew, to get there, and to train. That was very exciting in itself, you know, just to get team runouts there, get kicking in the stadium. It's such an enormous place, and you could sort of sense the excitement throughout the squad that, you know, it was certainly a privilege to be there, and there was great excitement about the match coming up against France as well.
Yeah, I think sort of the general, probably the first thing that when you walk out of the tunnel, the size of the stands, you know, the sheer magnitude of the stadium. You know, you look round and three sides are enormous, and then you have the Hill 16 end, and you know, it really, I felt it managed to combine a state-of-the-art modern stadium with still keeping a bit of the old sort of nostalgic, you know, the hill, the bit of terracing. Obviously, when you get out onto the middle of the pitch, the next thing that struck you was the distance from the centre of the playing surface to the front of the stand. You know, obviously we're used to playing in rugby stadiums where they're right on the touchlines, and this, because of the difference in the diameters of the pitches, wasn't going to be the case. But certainly the first training session there, you know, you could hear the echoes of the boys when we were training, and you knew that this is a big stadium.
While the ground itself is obviously steeped in history, the stadium itself was relatively new. So
I think probably it didn't quite hit home to us just how much history there was there until, you know, it was seen as such a big deal by guys that had grown up playing Gaelic and watching a lot of Gaelic games, that, you know, it's such a big deal for us to be playing there. Rala always brings sort of the footballs and the hurleys and slithers. He has them everywhere he goes.
Yeah, there was a bit of that. I remember there was. I think we probably even had a football as well, a Gaelic football. You know, people were taking kicking points into the hill and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a lot of giddiness around. There was a lot of giddiness around, but also the fact that the stadium is incredible. It was probably one of the best stadiums in the world. The facilities are some of the best. The training rooms are fantastic, and it's just a massive venue. It's got a huge character about it.
I suppose I was a bit obsessed with hitting drop goals, so my main aim was to hit a drop goal from the halfway line. So I would be going out and try to hammer these, and of course, sort of Rog and Paddy Wallace would just step up and hit it over no problem. But I suppose at that point, my main aim was to make sure that I belted one over before I left there, and it was nice to get a few, I think, by the end of that Six Nations.
Yeah, I picked up a hamstring in Cardiff, and I remember it was very close. He really, really wanted to play. I remember Gary O'Driscoll, the team doctor, it was literally the Friday morning. We did a team run at Croke Park, and we did the warm-up. He warmed up on his own. I remember him running up and down the touchline, and Gary putting him through all the speed tests. And I wasn't over there doing it. I just let him get on with it. But I'm watching the body language as close as you can imagine. And I just remember at one stage he went through some things, and then Gary spoke to him, and I was watching, and I just saw his head go down, and I said, "Oh, damn it! I knew." And Gary said he's not going to make it. He's very close. But if he plays against France and he does a number on this hamstring, you won't have him for the rest of the championship. So it's like, he might have got through the game, but it was always a risk. He'd really do a number. He said, but if he doesn't play against France, he'll be 100% for England. It's a no-brainer, you know.
Certainly at that time in 2007, he was by some distance the most important player of the team. He's a remarkable player. He's undoubtedly the greatest Irish rugby player I've ever seen, greatest Irish captain. He led from the front, others followed. And I remember Paul O'Connell once said of him, you know, when I asked him, you know, what is special about O'Driscoll, he said, not only is he a go-to man, is he the one you want to get the ball to in a time of crisis if you need something to happen, but he's also the first guy you'd have in the trenches with you, and he will throw his body on the line, and his bravery physically is absolutely beyond dispute. So he was pretty much the complete package and a complete team player, and without him, Ireland were never quite the same, particularly around that time.
It was almost like it was a bit of a shame that the England game wasn't first. I think that would have just fallen a little bit better. I think people would have liked for the first time to be the first match against England at Croke Park. I think it would have made the occasion even better. Because even in the lead up to the French match, people were talking about the English match at Croke Park.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Croke Park. It is a seismic occasion for Irish sport, a seismic occasion for the Irish people. The atmosphere is special, it's unique, it's wonderful, and quite simply, it's an absolute privilege to be here.
I just remember Eddie speaking, and he was very animated and passionate and trying to get it across that, you know, today was a chance to make history. Today was a special place, a special day in Irish sport, and you know, we were very, very aware of that, and it was I suppose a brand new start for the country in some ways, you know.
We're off and running at Croke Park.
The moment actually I do remember is the I remember the try actually pretty well, where Ronan scored the first try, and I'd been involved in the move, the run-up try, so I was following the play. So I had a really good vista of Ronan when I think he took a pass from Dave Wallace and just run around the corner, and so I had a really good vista of Ronan against just the backdrop of people, because the way, whatever way it happened, there wasn't anyone in my line of vision between Ronan scoring and any of the French players or Irish players for that reason, for that matter. No, I think we were pretty nervous. I think our first half was pretty poor. I remember I don't think anyone was particularly happy with the way we played in the first half. As it so often happens, I think the occasion in those sort of things weighed heavily on us, and that probably reflected the nervousness of our performance.
We hadn't played well, but we got ourselves in position to win it. We were a point ahead, and then we mauled them about 40 metres up the pitch, got another penalty, Rog kicked it, suddenly we're 4 points ahead, and you know, once you get out of that penalty zone in international rugby, once you get more than 3 points ahead, you sort of feel a little bit more comfortable, and with a couple of minutes to go, we felt they can't do it with a drop goal or a jamming penalty, they're going to have to score. We have a very good defence, so you know, as sitting on the bench at that stage that I'd been subbed, it felt, look, we're going to finish this out, and then just when they regained the kick-off with about 2 minutes to go, it just was a sense of dread, and then lo and behold, I think it was Vincent Clerc went straight to the middle of us, and it was just nobody said anything, you know, it was absolutely heartbreaking. And
Ireland really had the win in the game, if they secured the restart, or if they'd won the ball, or if they'd made their tackles. I just think you have to give France credit for having beaten Ireland on the day.
When France scored the winner with time almost up, I remember I left the stadium that day absolutely dejected.
Everyone wanted to be part of the first game in Croke Park. No one wanted to be on the first team to lose in Croke Park. Unfortunately, we were both. So yeah, like I wouldn't say there was a sense of shock, but a shock at the way we lost because we'd come so close to winning, but also a realisation that we hadn't played as well as we really should have played, and that maybe the occasion got to us.
When you lose a game like that, like a complete sucker punch, you know, the final minute of the final round, and you're on the canvas, it's just like it's hard to get guys off the floor. But you remind them that, you know, that you can come back from it. If you've just if you've got this mental toughness to bounce back from it, you can come back from it. And that was my focal point in the change room. You weren't going to get it done in the change room, but you at least sow the seeds in their brain that, look, okay, this was a sucker punch. We dropped our guard and we got caught. We can't change it. The Grand Slam is over. It's not going to happen. But we can bounce back from it. And oh, by the way, we better bounce back from it, because in 2 weeks' time we're playing England here.
The build-up to that game was extraordinary. It was like no other game. Like, it was definitely as if you were going to be playing for the Triple Crown, the Grand Slam and everything else.
Oh, Brian Ashton, you know, he coached me when he coached Ireland. We were working together for the English Rugby Union at the time, and I think it was quite simple, really. I think Brian was pretty conscious of the enormity of the game, but also historically that these young English players had to understand. Should they understand Irish history? Yes and no. And he didn't want, you know, a throwaway comment to offend anybody, and he wanted them to understand just exactly. So I think fair play to Brian for actually having that thought process inside.
What he did was he came in just to say, look, this is the history around it, and this is and I think, despite what I've just said, you know, it's very easy as a rugby player just to go around with blinkers and not open your mind to everything, and you know, we've got to be very, very respectful of of all the history. You know, as you say, you know, we're not directly responsible for it, but you know it's a very important part of history, and so he was given an Irishman's perspective of that, and I think you know it's important. Whilst you don't want to let it affect you, of course you've got to be aware of it.
What struck me wasn't so much what happened in terms of with the English team, but the number of the players who came up to me afterwards to start asking questions on top of the talk they got. So it wasn't one of these things that they sat down in and they listened and they walked out of the room. There was a number of them and some of the coaching staff who just came up and said, oh, what about this, what about that? And so a little bit of reading up, talking to my dad, making sure I got my facts straight, and then trying to get the message across in a very simple way. Forget these were, mid-20s, most of them. They were just preparing for a match, and but as I come back to, Brian wanted them to understand exactly what sort of place it was, but I think I did too good a job.
Hogan was again, was very much revived, and all the stories of what happened on that day of Bloody Sunday, and I think it was a reinvigoration of Irish history again.
J.J. Barrett, he had played for Kerry, he'd won All-Ireland with Kerry. His father was a famous footballer way back. He'd have been in the troubled times as well, and he had won 5 All-Irelands, and his medals were in the museum, and JJ took them out of the museum as a protest. He was entitled to do that, but both sides, they were genuinely thinking, this is my view. And
so on the day that the game was going to happen, I wanted people to read a piece that would say, there are people in this country for whom this is much more than a rugby match. People who may have grave reservations about the match taking place. So I wanted to speak with somebody who had been involved in the Troubles, had family involved in the Troubles, who was very much on the Republican side, and whose attitude I expected would be playing God Save the Queen at Croke Park will be a violation of all that I have fought for and all that I have stood for. And the man I picked was Oliver Hughes.
He asked my views on it, particularly about playing the British National Anthem. And I had no difficulty expressing my views, that I had no problem with the game being played in Croke Park, and I had less problem with the game, or with the British National Anthem being played, because I felt it was an international event, and that as protocol on that day that the visiting team plays their national anthem. I do realise also that it probably was a change in my thinking from what I may have thought 5 years, 4 years, 3 years before it.
Well, if Oliver Hughes is telling you to respect the playing of the of God Save the Queen at Croke Park, well then probably you should respect it.
Now we were going from that little trip, which was just really we dragged it out for a couple of miles, for a mile or maybe 2 miles, to going across to the other side of Dublin, which was a fantastic experience as well. It was brilliant, really nice, and there was throngs of people on the streets that day walking, and every time the bus stopped at the traffic lights or if it slowed down, there was cheering and beeping, and it was a really nice way to get to the game.
The size of the event was beginning to dawn on them, and guys are going to withdraw a little bit. And what I didn't want us to do was go out like we did against France 2 weeks earlier and play inside ourselves for 20 minutes and give England, let England get into the game and then try to reel them in. Didn't work. We nearly did it against France, but ultimately it didn't get us. Didn't want that to happen. So I was watching the body language, and I wanted to make sure that we got out of the change rooms, and when the ball was kicked off, we got into England. There was no stepping off them.
In the tunnel, that's a time where you can just really allow the emotion to come in then, because you're so focused on doing your stuff, but there's a few moments that you can really allow the emotion to get to you, and standing in the tunnel beforehand, that was one of them.
Then we heard that England were going out, and I decided to play a little bit of silly buggers with him, and I said to Draco, I think we'll let him stew a little bit out there, So they went out, And then we got the knock on the door, you know, up you're up, guys. And I said, right, thanks. And I told the manager, put his back to the door, and we waited. And while we were waiting, we kept talking about keeping our focus. And then we got another knock on the door. And I said, yeah, we're on our way. Close the door. We'll even wait again. So we dragged it out, but it was something that we were in control of.
Teams play games, and that's... If you're going to allow being stood on the pitch for an extra 30 seconds to affect you, then your head's in the wrong place. You know, you're focused on the game, and you want to play a game. It's, you know, geez, they could have left us stand there for 5 minutes. It wasn't a problem.
The sense of anticipation is almost unbearable.
I do remember the fact that we were a bit delayed going onto the pitch against England, and we let the kind of noise build when it was announced that we were coming out. But it's amazing how the noise outside is cut off when you're in the bowels of the stadium, and but yet so close. But for that game, I'm not sure if they closed the bars or whatever differently, but because of the occasion of the game, everyone wanted to be in the stadium, in their seats when the teams came out. The English game was in the evening as well, so it was darker, and just to be hit by the wall sounds fantastic.
I can say with certainty that there's never been anything like this. Raw emotion, raw passion.
We'd come through a lot of history and we were changing. It was 2007. The Celtic Tiger was still just roaring. We changed as a people. The GAA had been ultra-nationalist. So I thought if England came to play and God Save the Queen was received respectfully, it would be a huge moment. I thought there was a risk, perhaps, that it wouldn't be, but I hoped that it would be.
You know, there was an audible silence just in advance of the anthems, and I think people were determined to provide a respectful atmosphere for it. So I think as well a lot of people actually really wanted to hear it. Hear it actually to be there to say that they heard it sung there, so that they could use that to kind of reply with our own anthem when it started.
I always remember when President McAleese came back up from the pitch, there was almost silence in the ground because the people knew that it was going to start. And she came back up to me and embraced me, as we always did at those matches, and that went up on the screen and everyone laughed, and there'd be huge laughter because normally you wouldn't even hear a laugh like that, but there was stony cold silence. And if you watch that back now, it was so quiet, and everyone was conscious, in the second the God Save the Queen's going to be on, what the God will happen.
Because there was so much media-led hype building up to that game. You didn't know what to expect, and actually now I'll take that back. I think we were expecting some sort of reaction, because of what had been said, because of the amount of publicity.
Ladies and gentlemen, the anthems will now be played by the combined Army No. 1 and Guard bands.
Really nice guy, great fella, proper gentleman, and I remember him clapping the crowd after it was observed.
No words needed.
Yeah, it was special. I thought, God Save the Queen, never have I been away from home and got such a buzz from hearing and singing God Save the Queen than I did that day in Croke Park because of everything which had gone on.
And I could see he was sort of taken aback by it, because I think they thought there was going to be some sort of demonstration. There was, there was going to be booing. There's a lot of talk there might be booing, but I think it really surprised him. And as a result, I think they were a little bit disarmed. I'd imagine that their motivation beforehand was like, they don't respect us here. They don't think we should be here. And when they feel the hostility from the crowd, then that was going to be a huge motivating factor for them. And it didn't occur.
And when the moment came, I was sitting at home watching the whole experience. I think it transcended sport. It was a transcendent moment where sport allowed Irish people to be themselves. There was no politics involved in this. This was a moment of reconciliation between the people, ordinary people on both sides of this.
We knew that Oran Naveen was going to be a special moment, and it is anyway. It is generally, it does get you fired up. It does, any Irishman, he hears his national anthem. I think it stirs something, and then you add into that the surroundings, the opposition, the history, and the social context. And I think he knew that it was going to be a pretty big deal.
The only thing I had thought was from the French game, listening to some of the lads after the match, the likes of Leamy and Mikey McGurn and them, saying that they hadn't heard Oran Naveen ever sung like that before. And I thought, well, I never used to sing the national anthem when I played with Ireland, but I thought, like, if this was as special as these lads were making out, then you might as well give it a go. So that's what I was just kind of thought, like, oh, I'm going to sing the national anthem for the game. But there was no other. Apart from that, I was just focusing on trying to win.
Yeah, I can say there was a sense that because the English anthem was respected so much, that was great. It was a sense of relief, but a sense of, that's fantastic. It was a great uplift, and I think it fed into the emotion of our anthems. I really do feel that, and the players, there was a surge of emotion in the players, and you saw it, palpably in some players, like John Hayes crying.
I think there's so many guys, who were kind of emotional on that day. It kind of added it. And it's only when I was looking at tapes afterwards, or photographs of John, that you kind of realise, what other states guys were in.
That Irish national anthem, after the silence that was afforded the English national anthem, unless Ireland was to make a World Cup final or something, I doubt very much I'll ever hear anything like it again in my life.
I remember standing outside the RTE little studio there, and Jeremy Guscott, the BBC guy, was there, and he was standing beside me, and I won't repeat what he said, but after the anthems were played and as the team split away, he just turned to me and he said, "Oh my God, we are in deep trouble."
The formality's over. It's only a matter of time before a rugby match breaks out.
Brian would have just brought us in and I think, if I remember, it would have just been listen to the noise, listen to the atmosphere. This is our time, let's make it happen. And he'd made the point throughout the week that it would be us that would create the atmosphere. The atmosphere was going to be at a level.
Nobody took a step backward. It was very much that this was our spot, even though it wasn't like a Lansdowne road. We were only sort of borrowing it for a while, but it was Irish soil, and I think there was everybody was protecting that.
Croke Park is ready. England kick off. It's the third round of the RBS Six Nations, and we're underway at Croke Park.
This big English pack that were coming to get us, we really went after them and really hammered them there, and you could nearly sense that they were sort of taken aback by this. This was something that this was their thing. They bullied people, they scrummed people, they mauled people, and all of a sudden we were the ones doing that to them, and you could nearly see it in their eyes that they were going, "No, this doesn't happen." And I just remember there was a bit of a break made, and we just recycled the ball, and you could hear the back screaming for it, and so you knew there was something on. I think it came through Driscoll's legs, or it went along the ground, eventually sort of bounced past its way out to Girvan, but there's any number of about 3 people could have scored that. They were just at that stage it felt like the ground was going to collapse around us. You know, it was absolutely rocking, and again, it was another moment when you get few and far between those sort of moments when a team scores and the ground is literally feels like almost like what you would expect the old Roman Colosseums to feel like.
It was just a massive reaction in the stadium when he scored. Like, I mean, I could have shivered down my spine now thinking about it. That the release of energy in the stadium with that try, it was colossal. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And I think where Gervin scored it, from what I understand, and I stand correct on this, is a pretty historic spot. That's you know, on bloody Sunday, that's where one of the players was shot, where he actually scored a try, which is kind of, it's eerie to think like that.
While there are different stories as to where Michael Hogan was shot, always they had the ceremony over on the far side of the field, nearer to the Cusick side than the Hogan, even though some people say it was up around the Hogan end that it happened.
The next try was a classic David Wallace try. Not many guys can do. He's a phenomenal athlete. And I remember the try he got against England was very similar. He took a ball. We had England again. We had dragged him into the corner again. We got space on the outside and we got right up to the goal line. And Wally took a runner off the side, like, and he just ran over two people and put the ball down the goal line. Like, so it was like, now psychologically to England we had scored by going around them, and we'd now scored by going through them. So psychologically they're going, whoa, look, this is not going to be good.
The referee has a little look at his touch judges. That's enough. The crowd rise to their feet to applaud Ireland. With a spring in their step, they go to the changing room.
The forwards generally split, and we go over with Niall Donovan, and the backs would go with Eddie, and Graham Steadman, our defensive coach, would jibe in with whatever he had to say. And we just talk about how things were going, and you know, everything was going pretty well. So you don't want to relax, you just want to keep the focus and say, look, this is what we're doing well, and Niall would go over a few points, and then, you know, Paulie would just you know, keep on to people about, you know, keeping the foot on the throat, you know, like, it's easy to go in at half time and think, oh, we've done our job, and you mentally switch off. But the important thing is to try and get people thinking, well, back to square one now, and let's go out and not even just maintain the intensity we played the first half, but step it up again another level.
When you play in big games like that, you just want to do yourself justice, as a team, as an individual. Every game I've played in, I've started thinking, expecting I'm going to win. And no matter what happens, you know, you always think, yes, we can turn this around. Until it's physically impossible, you always think you can do something. And so you're there, you're in the process, right, what do we have to do to change this? And it was, you know, and so we put plans in place.
There they come, all ready for the second half. Back to you, Ryle.
Almost couldn't hear you handing back to us the noise level. Was so great there as Ireland made their way back out to Croke Park.
And at one point in the second half, when England scored their try, you just had a sense England are back in this game. England are moving the ball really well. You know, they're stretching us.
They came out in the second and David Strattley got a try in the corner. And I remember the funny thing is, the stadium went silent probably for the first time that day. It was just like someone sucked the air out of the stadium. And I remember thinking, yeah, well, now we'll find out like where we are as a team.
There's one absolute outstanding defining image of that game, and that is Ronan O'Gara's cross kick and Shane Horgan's try, because of Croke Park, because it's a kind of there's an element of Gaelic football to it.
3 metres short, presented for Stringer. O'Gara, crossfield kick, Shane Horgan's in position. Oh yes! What a try! Executed magnificently.
Ball came in and he went up like a Gaelic player, brought it down, and certainly I think people felt that, you know, they belonged to Croke Park when they saw the catch.
It's feeling, it's the accuracy of the cross kick, it's kick pass, it's caught in the air above the head, you know, it's winning an aerial duel, and it was also the score that said England are beaten. There's no way they're coming back from this.
It was more than a kind of a sporting occasion. And it's the first time I've been involved in something that sort of transcended the sport itself, and from everything, the build-up, you know, people won't remember that we played France there and lost as well. That'll be forgotten after the English game, and everybody's focus was on that English game the whole time. The whole country was invested in it emotionally, and for it to go so well was, I think, was appropriate in the end as well, because it felt like we had a nation behind us, and I think that's what sort of propelled us to put in such a good performance.
I just thought that in the way he handled and conducted himself, he wasn't triumphalist, Eddie O'Sullivan. He wasn't at all triumphalist, neither was Brian O'Driscoll. They didn't go overboard about it. They knew they'd lost to France as well 2 weeks beforehand, and this was a one-off. They were evidently delighted, but as in the build-up to the game, so afterwards, in the way that he highlighted what Martin Curry did, in the way that he was not triumphalist, I thought Eddie O'Sullivan and Brian O'Driscoll and Brian O'Brien and everybody associated with it then, as they did in the build-up, struck all the right chords afterward as well.
I think it was a very salient moment, I think, for us as a nation, that, you know, we basically invited England to Croke Park and they sang God Save the Queen, and we respected that. I think that was a big moment for me. England playing in Croke Park was a step along that road to the Queen visiting Ireland. You know, that there was a sense that Ireland is a mature nation. You know, we're in a place where we can, you know, respect English traditions, can invite them into our country.
The Queen's itinerary, when it was unveiled before her visit in May 2011, was quite bold. And when you consider the trip to Croke Park in particular, that would have surprised some people. The idea, again, of these highly charged confrontations with a difficult past. You know, British monarch on the hallowed turf of Croke Park, the scene of Bloody Sunday 1920. It's unlikely that that ambition for the Queen to visit Croke Park would have been there in 2011 had that gesture in 2005 not been made in the first place. I don't think the Queen would have visited Croke Park in May 2011 if there had been an ugliness or a hostile reaction or trouble around the match.
While acknowledging the significance of the past and honouring all those who have lost their lives, including those that died in this place, the Gaelic Athletic Association has constantly supported and helped advance the peace process in Northern Ireland.
Just felt that, you know, something that we gave a lot of time to, spent a lot of emotion on, had worked out well. And I was just delighted for the country, really, and particularly for the fans who supported it, the clubs, and also I think for the Irish rugby team who performed so well. Because there's one thing to play England in the first game, but also the back of your minds, you just wanted to get one over the English, and then not only beat them, but I hammered them. So that made it very satisfying. And especially where Ireland is concerned, bringing North and South together, the two communities together, I think that was very important, because as we've seen, things have progressed since, and hopefully will continue to progress, because life is short, life is important, and you're better off to be looking at the positives rather than the negatives, and also looking at what unites you people rather than divides you.
Coming through Irish sport, and I remember doing a research with a colleague of mine in the Irish Times many years ago, and how many schools rather, only allowed Gaelic, or only allowed rugby, or only allowed soccer, and never two of the three shall meet. And stories of kids being run off training grounds if they had the wrong shaped ball or the wrong implement to play sports with. And I just thought, in a country where the resources are so small, that to be able to coexist would have been a whole lot better. And I do believe that from that day onwards, and that whole tenant-landlord relationship between the GA and the RFU, they suddenly realised they could coexist and get on quite well. And I think they also discovered that there was a much bigger crossover than they realised in the two sporting codes in players and supporters. The amount of supporters, GA supporters, who will go on to Croke Park to support the rugby team and vice versa. And that also enhanced that relationship. I think more GA fans became rugby fans, and more rugby fans discovered Croke Park. You know, there've been all the jokes about, you know, they'd need their compass there and they'd need a map and a tour guide to get to Croke Park from the south side of Dublin in their sheepskin coats and the rest of it. But for all that cliche stuff, the more Irish rugby fans definitely started going to Croke Park as a result of that relationship of those years, and I think the relationship has been enhanced between the two codes and the two organisations, and bettered forevermore. It'll always be better as a result of that.
I do remember I think it was the first day we went training, Sean Kelly was there, and he was obviously the guy who was really instrumental in making this happen, so a lot of respect for him anyway. But the way he just said is, this is a stadium for sport, and this is the stadium for sportsmen and women of Ireland to play in, so it's only right that you get to play it.